To begin the conversion to put on your motor kit, conversion kit, you need to remove these gears. You will not need these gears anymore. You will not have to stand there and hand crank. The motor will do all the work for you, and it makes it such an enjoyable experience. So depending on how old your Whirley pop is, if you have an old one that you're using to convert, it'll have a flathead screw right in here, and there's one on each gear. You just need to remove those. If you have a newer one, it uses a 2.5 millimeter Allen wrench set screw. So we will begin by removing these screws and removing the gears. This is an older one, so I'm going to use a flathead screwdriver. So we got that one removed. We'll go ahead and remove the other one. Then after removing the screws, you can then remove the plastic gears. And you can just pull on the handle, and that one should come right off. You want to save your handle. You do not want to get rid of that. You will be using it. It adds stability to the overall handle. So keep that. Although you're not going to be cranking it, obviously, it will be used for stability. And then do the same thing here with the other one. Just pull it off. And this one's been used, so it's pretty grimy. And there's the copper ferrule that's in there that kind of acts as a bearing, so to speak, for the shaft as it rotates inside there. So keep that lubricated with vegetable oil, not much, just a dab. Maybe do that every 2 or 3 roasts, and that'll keep it spinning very well. And so now you're going to use the shaft there. So it is loose right now, so you can go ahead and lay that aside. Don't lose it. And that copper ferrule, we'll just make sure you don't lose that as well. Then next, what you need to do is we need to cut, and I always cut it right about here, just on the top flat near the bend. And then after cutting it, you're going to bend this. You're going to bend this section up to where it is nearly straight. It's difficult to get it perfectly straight because it is stainless steel. And so then you'll just have a stub here, which you're going to put the handle back in through after you're done, and then you're going to attach the motor to this flat part after you bend it up using the hose clamp. Here is the stirring shaft, and on the end here I just wanted to show you the indentation on there. That's where your set screw is going to go back into when you put the nylon spacer onto it. One screw goes into that, and the other screw goes in the nylon spacer into the drive shaft of the motor. How I cut it with a Dremel, you can use a saw to cut it. Any other way, whatever you do though, make sure you use the proper safety equipment and personal protection as well, such as gloves and glasses, which I have on. Now we have it cut open. You just need a way of bending it up. Just get you a couple pair of pliers, or this actually works pretty well because it's got a nice flat surface to it. You just tighten it down on there, use the other one, and bend it up. Get it as straight as you can. Don't worry if it's got a little bit of if it's not perfectly straight. Just as long as it's, for the most part, straight up. And that'll act as your support to clamp your motor on. So here's a one that I use to roast my coffee. You just, like I say, you just bend it up, and this is where your clamp is going to go around the motor, and that part to clamp your motor into the nylon spacer, which is the next step. We'll show how to do that, and pretty much we're almost done. So now if you had if you took your copper ferrule out before when you were cutting it like I did, put it back in, get your shaft and put it through. At this point now we're going to put on the nylon spacer with the screws. Once you cut this with a cutting wheel on a Dremel or whatever other method that you choose, the Dremel cutting wheel seems to work very well. You can also, of course, sand this down and get rid of any rough edges, but I really haven't found that to be a problem. Then, as you notice here, you have this little indentation on the shaft. Make sure your copper ferrule is still in there, that you haven't lost that. Take the shaft coupler that came with the kit, and you want to put the larger of the two screws on the top, and the one on the bottom will go into the indentation on the shaft using a 2.5 millimeter Allen wrench to tighten it. So let's do that. Now, once you got the coupler mounted on the shaft, there shouldn't be any play in it. If you do still have some play, give it another turn or two. All right, that feels better. And now you can see that when that turns, it turns the shaft at the bottom. Next, you want to take your motor that came in your kit and position it so that it'll fit into the coupler, but also be fairly close to the piece of the band of metal that comes up, because you're going to later on you want to strap that to the band of metal using this hose clamp. So the Allen wrench that you need for this is a 3/32. This one here is a 3/32. It's the only one I own. But I also found that a T-wrench, or I guess they call them torque wrenches, if you find one that just happens to fit inside a 3/32, make sure you get the screw set into there's a hole in the shaft. That set screw will just fit right into that hole, or snug down onto the hole to hold it in place. Alright, so the screw should just be slightly sticking out of the spacer. And once you get that as tight as you can, then just turn it till it's fairly snug there. Place the clamp over. I like to set the screw on the outside. Alright, so I position it just at the top of the motor. And you do not have to tighten this real tight. All you're doing is making sure that the motor is not going to turn from the friction of the stirrer on the beans. If you don't mount it to something like this, it will cause the motor to turn instead of the shaft to turn. So, like I said, it doesn't have to be really tight. You can just snug it up there a little bit. And at this point, it's pretty much complete. So then, now all you have to do is hook up the electric supply that came with the kit. Right here it plugs in, and plug it in and it'll start working. And so let's see how that works. All right, I had to move over here next to a plug. So you just take the power supply end here and plug it in, and then the motor is going to start turning, and there you go. You got your automated coffee roaster from a converted Whirley popper. So obviously they don't need this on, if you're doing popcorn, it only takes 3 minutes, but if you're standing there for 20 minutes, this is obviously a big advantage. You still want to supervise the process, of course, because you probably have an open flame, or anyway, you just want to keep an eye on the roast, so you don't want to completely leave the area. I usually just do little things around the garage, since I roast out in the garage while it's operating. So it'll just sit there and turn and turn and turn while you can do other stuff and just periodically check the temperature. Now I do have, in this one, I have a hole right there that I can put a thermometer in and monitor it. The other thing you want to make sure is, like I said earlier, keep this handle. It gives support to this handle so it doesn't bend, because without it, this part here, without this part that I'm turning, you'll lose a lot of stability in the handle. So keep that in there. You just want to make sure you don't push it in too far so that it interferes with the turning of the motor. You can see, there's a little bit it's a little bit off center on the shaft, but that's not a big deal because the piece of metal that you've attached it to is flexible and it'll bend with it. And after roasting a lot of coffee with this setup, it works pretty well. You can tape this handle here so that it doesn't go all the way in, or whatever method you want. I don't do anything with it. I just make sure that before I turn it on, it's not touching the plastic spacer. And the plastic spacer does not melt. It's made out of nylon. Nylon has very high melting point. It also has the benefit of being very smooth when rotating on metal.